December 16th, 1944. Before dawn, under a low grey sky, a man stands in the cupola of a king tiger and allows himself a rare, hard-earned optimism. Joachim Peiper, commander of the armoured spearhead, looks out over frozen fields and the narrow Ardennes lanes. He is leading what German planners call their best punch, the most heavily armoured tanks in service on the Western Front, concentrated into a formation meant to rip open the Allied line and race for the Meuse. For a few hours, the picture fits the plan. Villages fall, American positions are bypassed or overrun, and abandoned supply trucks offer a glimpse of immediate relief. It is, for a moment, the moment Germany's best tanks almost claimed victory. But there is an invisible opponent in that winter dawn, not a brigade across a hedgerow, not an air attack, but a ledger of litres, miles and time. That ledger belonged to logistics, and in this campaign, logistics kept a different calendar from frontline bravado. What the map did not show, what no gun could fix, would prove decisive. If you like deep dives into the logistics that decide battles, hit like and subscribe. This is a story of steel and arithmetic, of audacity clipped by supply. The machine in which Peiper stood deserves a moment of sober description. The King Tiger, or Tiger II, was an apex predator on paper. A mass approaching 70 tons, sloped and thick frontal armor measured in the hundreds of millimeters at certain points, and an 88mm KWK 43L71 gun capable of destroying almost any Allied tank at long range. In a head-to-head exchange across a winter lane, the King Tiger was the last thing most Allied crews wanted to meet. But machines exist in environments that have their own rules. The Tiger II's power plant was designed to move a very heavy vehicle, but movement consumed fuel at prodigious rates. Published contemporary reports and after-action analyses vary. The exact numbers are disputed, but engineers and crew testimonies place on-road consumption in the hundreds of litres per 100 kilometres and off-road or tactical manoeuvring figures that spike dramatically higher. Some accounts report figures as steep as roughly 800 litres per 100 kilometres under heavy cross-country movement. Others provide lower averages but still point to a fundamental truth. The King Tiger chewed through fuel in a way that made long, independent thrusts extremely fragile. Every extra ton of armor, every powerful engine output demanded a real-world tax paid in fuel and in the complexity of keeping that fuel moving toward the front. To make the arithmetic concrete, take an objective roughly 120 kilometers away. The distance Peiper's spearhead aimed to close toward the Meuse. If an individual tank under rough conditions, consumed something on the order of 800 litres per 100 kilometres off-road, then that is roughly 960 litres for a 120-kilometre cross-country push. Tanks did not carry unlimited reserves. They had internal tanks and could carry additional fuel in drums or in accompanying trucks, but the logistics chain, the trucks, the fuel dumps, the protected lines of communication, had to align perfectly. A few captured fuel trucks could patch a fuel shortfall for moments, but they could not convert a tactical shock into sustained operational reach. Early on, the spearhead's sharp thrust resembled a plausible path to success. American defenses in several sectors were thin and sometimes stunned by the audacity and speed of the German attack. Small units, like elements of the 99th Infantry Division, were surprised and in several places withdrew or were bypassed, leaving behind vehicles and supplies. Peiper's men pushed through, seized crossroads, and in the confusion improvised solutions, siphoning fuel from abandoned trucks, loading jerry cans in the dark, redistributing what they could. The crews tasted what victory might be. A clean shot to the rear, a corridor to the Meuse, a chance to split the Allied line. But momentum on the ground collides with geography and engineering choices just as often as it collides with enemy formations. Roads in the Ardennes are natural choke points, narrow winding lanes, a string of stone and wooden bridges, culverts and fords, spanning small rivers and streams. American engineers and commanders understood that if they could deny those crossings, they could turn German speed into wasted mileage. General Courtney Hodges, commanding First Army sectors, ordered demolitions and other denial measures. Where a bridge once offered a direct route, its sudden absence forced a column of heavy tanks to pause, to queue, to try secondary crossings, or to pry out longer detours over country that was never meant for machines of that size. The operational effect of a blown bridge is deceptively simple and devastating. A direct route of, say, 5 kilometers becomes a detour of 30. That extra distance is not a minor expense for a vehicle consuming hundreds of liters per 100 kilometers. It is a rate multiplier. If a King Tiger burns 800 liters per 100 kilometers off-road, adding 30 extra kilometers does not merely consume 30% more fuel. Much of that travel will be over poorer surfaces or involve repeated starts and stops that raise consumption above the average. The result is exponential. A formation built to punch through along planned lines finds itself draining its most precious resource while dodging craters, bottlenecks, and sudden frost-choked streams. There is an image that keeps recurring in accounts of those days. Long columns of German tanks and trucks halted, engines idling in the cold, crews wrapped in coats but not in comfort. The engines ticking and the faint smell of diesel were the soundtrack of attrition. American engineers, having detonated bridges or sabotaged culverts, would watch as the spearhead was forced to spool out longer routes. Each mile eaten by detours multiplied the chance that a given tank would run on fumes before reaching the objective. Amid these arithmetic margins of failure, the one thing that could have changed everything appears in every retelling as a moment of tragic near miss. Near Stavelot, or in the swampy approaches toward the northern axis of advance, contemporary accounts reported an enormous American fuel dump, sometimes described in period sources as containing up to 2 million gallons, a number that later historians have treated with caution and qualifications. That claim is contested, measurements and records from the time are incomplete, and the fog of war inflated impressions. Still, a large fuel concentration existed in the theatre, and it lay for a time tantalizingly within reach of the spearhead. How then did Peiper's column pass it? Why did a formation that was scavenging jerry cans move past a potential lifeline? There are several intersecting causes. The battlefield in December was a confused place. Smoke from burning vehicles and deliberate obscuration made visual identification difficult. The route of advance had been planned. Commanders were under orders to keep moving along their axis toward the Meuse and to seize bridges, crossroads and towns that were thought to be decisive. Stopping to secure a massive supply concentration would expose the flank and slow the entire offensive. Anathema to a blitz-style doctrine that sought to multiply local superiority by speed. Some accounts note that what the Germans saw was a road on fire, columns of burning trucks and jerry cans that from a distance suggested the dump was either already destroyed or too risky to approach. Whether that interpretation was a mistake, a prudence, or simply a matter of poor visibility, the result was the same. They drove past what might have been their salvation. When the supply math finally dawned in the individual crews' radios and voice reports, it did not come as a single thunderclap, but as a number of little defeats stacking up. Tankers reported tanks losing power on rising grades, vehicles that could not be restarted after a cold night shutdown, auxiliary generators dead, orders filtered down and up the chain, redistribute fuel, cannibalize trucks, funnel jerry cans forward, conserve. Field radios crackled with practical pained messages. Running low, tanks dying, need fuel. Airdrops were organized. but the Luftwaffe in the closing months of 1944 could not provide the sustained logistical air bridge the situation required. Airdrops brought ammunition, medical supplies, and sometimes the morale of a delivery. But fuel, the liquid that moves heavy steel, proved hard to deliver accurately into small moving pockets of desperate need. At the tactical level, this meant options narrowed. An armored spearhead that cannot refuel cannot exploit breakthroughs. Instead of accelerating toward a river crossing, columns were forced to stop to refuel or to siphon from captured trucks, expanding their time in exposed positions. Mechanical failures mounted. Heavy tanks put extraordinary strain on tracks and suspensions when forced over secondary routes or when repeatedly maneuvering at slow speeds in confined lanes. Every breakdown had a ripple effect. One immobilized vehicle could block a narrow lane for hours, forcing the entire formation to wait or to attempt an awkward bypass that consumed more fuel and risked exposure. What had been a momentum-based power became a clogged, fragile machine. The situation hardened toward a grim climax as orders from higher command attempted to salvage the operation. By Christmas Eve, with the weather still cold and the spearhead dispersed and short of fuel, Peiper was ordered to break out. The order came with a cost. Tanks that could not move would have to be abandoned, and German doctrine, pragmatic, brutal, required that they not fall intact into enemy hands. Crews were instructed to destroy what they could not take, to render heavy armament and armor useless. Thus the image that became a bitter symbol of the campaign, hulks of King Tigers and other armored vehicles burned out in roadside clearings, their once formidable silhouettes reduced to blackened shells. The place where many of these destroyed tanks accumulated is referred to in contemporary accounts by a few names. Some sources identify the site as Lays, others use variations or nearby place names, reflecting inconsistent mapping and the confusion of combat. The essence is the same, a roadside graveyard of tanks, a tableau of ambition and failure. In the pale winter light, the hulks glowed with residual heat. Their turrets sat at odd angles, tracks lay twisted. For the crews who walked away, the destruction was a personal and collective loss. Men trudged back through snow and mud, carrying what they could, pistols, personal effects, perhaps a jerry-can or two if fortune permitted. But many walked empty-handed. Exhaustion, cold, the small indignities of hunger and wet clothing, and the palpable sense that whatever tactical prowess had been shown had been outmatched by a simpler arithmetic. No fuel, no maneuver, no success. Accounts emphasize the human element without indulging in theatricality. Men who had been confident in their hardware found themselves stripped of choice. Their courage did not translate into operational reach. There were casualties, killed and wounded in the fighting, men damaged by exposure, and there were moral casualties, the erosion of initiative when the means of movement disappeared. The personal stories are important because they underline a central point. Industrial and logistical superiority translates into the power to sustain operations over time. An opponent with more factories, more pipelines, more secure ports, and a more robust distribution network can absorb losses and outlast a tactical shock. There is a temptation in military history to fetishize battlefield moments. A turret peering over a hedge, a coordinated flank, as if a single eruption of violent excellence could decide a great war. The Ardennes episode under Peiper resists that simplistic reading. Tactical audacity and technological superiority did produce localized advantages. For hours, German armored formations appeared to have a real chance. But modern mechanized warfare ties victory to the ability to move fuel and ammunition at scale. The Allies, with their industrial depth and logistic networks that stretched from American factories to English ports and forward to supply dumps on the continent, could replace losses. They could, crucially, keep their frontline units moving. The German pillbox of armor found itself fighting against a system it could not match. There are other variables worth noting. and responsible analysis must acknowledge them. Weather-limited air operations for both sides, intelligence and surprise played a role in the initial German success. Command decisions on both sides influenced the flow of battle. But when we isolate the decisive pivot in this campaign, we return again and again to the same ledger. The arithmetic of fuel and distance, of destroyed bridges and forced detours, of missed opportunities to seize supply points. The King Tiger, as potent as it was, became a stranded symbol, a technological marvel negated by broken lines of supply. The visual of the burned-out King Tigers is almost cinematic, precisely because it collapses a complex failure into a single frame. Here were the tools of battlefield dominance made impotent not by better guns, but by absence of the simplest consumable. The lesson stretches beyond the Ardennes. From the Great War came the recognition that logistics wins wars. From the mechanized age, this truth is sharper still. Armies that can produce, move, and protect supplies can keep fighting. Armies that cannot, no matter how brilliant in small unit action, will find their reach exhausted. At the level of operational thinking, the episode underlines a clear strategic tension. Do you prioritize aggressive, risky thrusts that might pay off with strategic gains, but depend on fragile supply links? Or do you build a slower, more methodical advance, guaranteed by robust logistics? Peiper's drive embodied the former, an attempt to restore strategic initiative with a concentrated armored punch. In the end, the latter, the slow, grinding, industrial engine of the Allies, determined the outcome. There is also an ethical dimension in how we tell this story. We describe SS spearheads and German armored might not to glorify, but to understand. The men who served in these units fought under an ideology and a state responsible for atrocities. Technical admiration for tank design must always be counterbalanced by moral clarity. A careful account separates operational analysis from any praise of policy or purpose. The King Tiger as an engineering achievement exists in historical analysis, but the campaign's human costs, civilian suffering, prisoners, the horrors associated with those units, demand we keep a measured, critical voice. When Peiper and what was left of his formation pulled back, the immediate tactical crisis passed for that sector. The Germans had taken ground and then surrendered the strategic shape they needed to exploit it. The Ardennes offensive failed to produce the rupture planners had hoped for, and across the following months the war's momentum leaned ever more inexorably against Germany. Factories in the United States and Britain kept producing fuel, vehicles, and ammunition. Merchant ships and pipelines carried the lifeblood of the Allied armies to the continent. In the arithmetic of total war, production capacity and protected supply lines outranked tactical brilliance. So what is the final thought we should carry from that winter morning? The moment Germany's best tanks almost claimed victory is less a tale of lost heroics than a case study in the modern reality of warfare. Superior equipment demands a superior logistical tale. You can design a nearly invincible tank, you can assemble elite crews and dare the enemy with shock and speed, but without secure, predictable supplies, even the most formidable weapons become immobile monuments. The Ardennes shows this in stark relief, a concentrated thrust that founded not on a better gun, but on fuel. There is an old commander's aphorism that rings true here: amateurs talk strategy. Professionals worry about logistics. Peiper's spearhead offered a momentary glimpse of strategy unshackled. The professionals who won the larger contest did it by mastering the mundane, unspectacular work of keeping equipment and men replenished. As we close, consider the thought experiment that historians and armchair commanders still pose. Would you rather command the most powerful tank with no fuel, or a modest vehicle with an endless, reliable supply? The Ardennes offers a clear answer in practical terms. Let me know what you think. Would you choose hardware without logistics or steady supply with less hardware? Comment below and suggest other episodes you'd like examined from the perspective of the supply line rather than the shooting line. If this look at the cold mathematics that doomed an audacious drive interested you, subscribe for more deep dives into the logistics that shape history. The scene at Lays, the burned hulks, the walking survivors, the arithmetic that closed the window of possibility, stays with us not because of the machines alone, but because it teaches a decisive lesson. In modern war, industry and supply are the ultimate weapons.